You don't lose things in an archive, you just misfile them. But you know what you can't ever refile? The moment you realize your husband of 38 years was a stranger wearing a familiar face. I found it. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The dryer had just buzzed, that sharp electric shriek that cuts through the thick, suffocating humidity of a Savannah night. I was standing in the laundry room of our Gordonston townhouse, our paid-off townhouse, or so I thought, sorting whites from colors. I was holding Silas's Burberry trench coat. He always loved that coat. Said it made him look like a spy in one of those old black and white movies on Turner Classic Movies. I stuck my hand in the left pocket. Just reflex. A habit formed over decades of marriage. Check for gum wrappers. Check for receipts. Check for loose change that rattles like bones. My fingers brushed against something thick, waxy, not just a slip of paper. I pulled it out and the air just left the room. It was a receipt from a place called Atlanta Moments Photography on Peachtree Street. $350 for a wedding day deposit. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Atlanta? We haven't been to Atlanta since the '96 Olympics. Silas hated driving on I-16. He said the truckers were maniacs and the traffic was a headache he didn't need. But taped to the back of that receipt, held down by a piece of Scotch tape that was starting to yellow, was a photograph. A glossy 4x6 print. I almost dropped it. My hands were shaking so hard I could hear the paper rattling against my wedding ring. I flipped it over, and there he was, my Silas, looking at a woman I had never seen in my life. He was wearing a tuxedo, not the charcoal one he wore to our daughter Sonia's wedding. This one was midnight blue, silk with a satin lapel. It looked expensive. It looked brand new. And the woman, she was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous. She was wrapped around him, her hand on the back of his neck, kissing him like the world was ending in 10 minutes. I knew his face. I knew that little crinkle by his left eye when he smiled, but I didn't know that joy. I didn't know that intensity. I told myself I was overthinking. I was tired. Grief does strange things to your brain, twists shadows into monsters. Maybe it was a costume party? Maybe he was an extra in a movie? That's what I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe my husband, the man who held my hand while my mother passed away, the man who drank sweet tea on the porch every Sunday, was just playing a role. But then I saw the altar in the background, and the flowers. White calla lilies. My favorite. Or so I thought. And that's when the memory hit me hard and cold. Last week, he came home smelling like rain and expensive perfume. He kissed my forehead, just a peck, and said, "You remember that widow I told you about, the one from the church? She needed help settling some estate paperwork up in Atlanta. I'm gonna drive up there, stay a couple of days, just to make sure she doesn't get taken advantage of by those city lawyers." He was so convincing. He looked at me with those soft, sad brown eyes and said, "You know me, Eloise. I just want to help the poor soul." The ink was dry on that lie, but the words were fresh poison. I turned the photo over, trembling so bad I nearly ripped it. There, written in blue ballpoint pen, neat, precise, just like his handwriting in the archive logs, was a date. September 14th. Last Tuesday. Last Tuesday, he told me he was at a regional bridge tournament in Charleston. He said he lost $50 betting on a slam and ate a shrimp and grits dinner at a place called The Wreck. I sat down on the cold tile floor, right there in the laundry room. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stared at that receipt. $350 for photos of my husband marrying another woman while I was at home worrying about the price of peaches? I looked at the timestamp on the receipt, 4:15 p.m., last Tuesday. I was texting him at 4:15 p.m. The text said, "Hope you're winning. Miss you." He texted back, "Love you. Wish you were here. I wasn't there. I was never meant to be there." You know that feeling when the floor underneath you just vanishes? That's exactly what happened to me right there, sitting on the cold ceramic tile of the laundry room. The dryer was humming that low, steady thrum. Usually it's a white noise that helps me think, but tonight it sounded like a countdown. I could hear the house settling, the pipes groaning in the walls of our Gordonston townhouse, and upstairs the distinct rhythmic snoring of Silas. He was asleep. He was actually asleep 2 floors up in our bed. sleeping the sleep of the just while I'm down here drowning in the lie of a lifetime. My knees were aching stiff from the cold, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, holding a receipt for $350 and a photograph of my husband wearing a tuxedo I'd never seen before. I looked at the Burberry trench coat hanging on the door hook, the one he wore to work every single day, and I realized I didn't know the man who put it on this morning. I had to hide the evidence. That's the archivist in me. You don't leave sensitive documents out where just anyone can find them. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the picture, sliding it into an old copy of Southern Living magazine, wedged in the rack next to the washer. I tucked the receipt into my pajama pocket, the paper feeling like it was burning a hole right through the silk. I sat there for another 10 minutes, just listening to the silence, letting the humidity of a Savannah night press against the windows until the glass sweated. And that's when the memory hit me. It came flooding back like a bad tide. It was about 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday, much like tonight, only it was raining. Silas came home late from his Masonic Lodge meeting. He walked into the kitchen, smelling of stale cigar smoke and rain, and he found me standing over the stove stirring a pot of gumbo. He had this look on his face. You know, the one where he tilts his head to the side and tries to look like a saint. He told me about Beverly. Poor Beverly, he said. He said she was a widow, new to the lodge, struggling to navigate the estate her late husband left behind. He told me, Eloise, she's drowning in paperwork. It's the Christian thing to do, helping her sort it out. He said he was just being a good Samaritan, driving up to Atlanta to help her file deeds and sort through tax returns. I remember nodding. I remember stirring that roof and thinking, that's Silas, always helping the little old ladies. But now I'm sitting on this floor and I realize Beverly wasn't a widow he was helping. She was the woman he was dating. The timeline fits perfectly. That was right around the time he started getting obsessive about our own paperwork. He came home one day with a massive heavy box from Office Depot, a fireproof safe, big as a microwave. I asked him why we needed it. We live in a low-risk flood zone. We have a security system. He told me he was worried about preserving the legacy. He said he wanted to organize his important documents, make sure everything was filed correctly in case anything happened to him. He spent weekends in his study with the door locked, the sound of the shredder whirring for hours at a time. I thought he was just going through a phase of getting his affairs in order. Turns out he was probably shredding credit card statements. He was hiding the financial trail that led right to Peachtree Street. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh, and I swallowed it whole with a glass of sweet tea. I pushed myself up off the floor, my joints popping in the quiet room, and a wave of nausea rolled over me. So hard I had to grab the edge of the washing machine to keep from falling over. He said he was just being a good Samaritan, looking at that magazine, hiding the photo. I realized he wasn't being a neighbor, he was being a husband. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a cliff and your brain screams at you to step back? That was me in the laundry room, but I didn't step back. I stepped forward. I had to know. I left the photo and receipt tucked inside the pages of that Southern Living magazine. Hiding the truth in plain sight just like he did, I walked out into the hallway. It was 2:20 a.m. by the kitchen clock. The house was breathing. The old floorboards always groan when the humidity rises, and tonight the air was so thick you could wear it like a wet wool coat. I walked past the guest room, past Sonia's old room, and stopped right in front of our master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear the air conditioner kicking on, that low hum we've lived with for 30 years. And underneath it him, Silas. Breathing. In, out. A sound that used to comfort me, a sound that used to mean safety, now sounded like a predator sleeping off a kill. I stood there for a full minute just listening to the clock ticking on the mantel. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Every second dragging. I needed to get to his closet. But that meant walking past the bed. I slipped off my house shoes. The carpet was rough under my bare feet, little needles of wool. I moved like a ghost, 1 inch at a time. I didn't breathe until I was standing inside the walk-in closet. I pulled the door almost shut behind me, leaving just a sliver of light. The closet smells like cedar and lavender. I went straight to the back wall. In an archive, you have a map in your head. You know exactly where the collection is housed, and I knew exactly where that old tuxedo was supposed to be. The one he wore to Sonia's wedding 5 years ago, that cheap polyester thing from Men's Warehouse that he complained about the entire night. It should have been there. I reached out into the dark. My hand touched empty hangers. Swish, swish, swish. Nothing but empty space. I felt a cold drop of sweat roll down my spine. He didn't get rid of it. Silas never throws anything away. He still has receipts from 1982. I turned on the closet light, but just the lower bulb, casting long, strange shadows. And there it was, hanging in the spot where his old tuxedo used to live. A garment bag. Not the flimsy plastic one from the dry cleaner. This was heavy, high-density canvas in a deep charcoal gray, with brass zippers that glinted in the low light. I'd never seen it before. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it might bruise them. I unzipped the bag. The sound was like a snake hissing in the quiet. And inside, inside was a suit. But it wasn't a suit for a garden party or a funeral. It was black, sharply tailored, dangerous looking. I touched the fabric. It wasn't the scratchy wool I was used to. This was silk. Superfine Italian wool. It felt like water under my fingertips. Cool. Expensive. Alien. I put my hand in the pocket. That's the first place an archivist looks, right? The pocket. And my fingers brushed against paper. Crinkly, sharp paper. I pulled it out. A receipt. Milan Taylor's, Buckhead, Atlanta. That's 300 miles away. The timestamp was September 12th. 2 days before the wedding. And the amount? I had to blink to make sure I was reading it right. $3,200. $3,200. For a suit. And here's the part that made the blood drain right out of my face. Under payment type, it didn't say Visa. It didn't say MasterCard. It said cash. Who pays $3,200 in cash for a suit? A man who is trying to leave no paper trail. A man who doesn't want his wife to see the bank statement. I stood there holding that receipt, listening to my husband sleep in the next room. Silas buys his t-shirts in a pack of 6 from Costco. He wears the same brown loafers until the soles wear smooth. He hasn't bought a new suit for himself in 20 years. And yet, here hangs this masterpiece of Italian tailoring. I put the receipt back in the pocket, exactly where I found it. You don't disturb the crime scene until you're ready to arrest the suspect. I zipped the bag back up, my hand shaking so bad the metal teeth jingled. I looked at that hanging bag, ghost-like in the shadows, and I realized the truth was hanging right next to me. Silas never bought anything nice for himself in 20 years. Who was he dressing up for? You might think it's strange what I did next. Standing there in the pitch black of the walk-in closet at 2:25 in the morning, you might say, Eloise, just close the bag. But you don't understand. When you've spent 40 years in the archives, you learn that the truth isn't always in the handwriting. Sometimes it's in the things people forget to scrub away. The dust, the fingerprints, and the scents. I didn't just want to see the evidence of his betrayal. I wanted to breathe it in. I reached out with a trembling hand and pulled that brass zipper down just another inch, just enough. I leaned in close, pressing my nose against the expensive Italian wool, and I inhaled. The smell hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't the smell of the dry cleaner. It wasn't the smell of Silas's cedar chest. It was perfume. Heavy, sweet, cloying. It was peaches and gardenias. Now, I have worn the same powder and lavender scent since I was 20 years old. It is understated. It is quiet. This was loud. This was a scent that walked into a room 5 minutes before the woman wearing it did. And that is when the floor dropped out from under me. The timeline in my head snapped back to a Tuesday afternoon 4 months ago. We were at the Kroger on Abercorn Extension, in the home goods aisle. Silas picked up this glass candle jar. It was a peach Bellini scent, and he held it up to his nose like he was smelling the Holy Grail. He closed his eyes, breathing it in deep, and then he looked at me with this smile. A smile I thought was loving. He said, "Elle, come here. Smell this. It smells like home, doesn't it?" I said, "Silas, that smells like a sorority house. It's too sweet." He just put it back on the shelf, but he kept his hand on it for a second too long. He looked at me and said, "I don't know. I think it's comforting. I think it's how things ought to be." How things ought to be. I stood there in the dark, gripping the edge of that garment bag until my knuckles turned white, realizing he wasn't talking about our life. He wasn't talking about our house on Gordonston. He was talking about her. He was already brainwashing himself. He was rewriting the chemical definition of home in his brain, so that when he came back to me smelling like cheap fruit, he wouldn't feel guilty. He was conditioning me to accept the smell of the other woman in my own bed. The absolute calculation of it, it made me feel sick. He paid $3,200 in cash to look good for her, and he wore her scent like a badge of honor right next to my old Burberry coat. I zipped the bag up slowly. The sound of the teeth clicking together echoed like a gunshot. I held my breath, listening for Silas to stir in the bedroom. I heard the steady rhythm of his breathing. The monster was asleep. I backed out of the closet into the shadows of our bedroom, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I wasn't the one who smelled like home anymore. I was just the woman who washed his clothes. I backed out of that room so slowly you would have thought the floorboards were made of dynamite. I didn't breathe until I had the doorknob clicked shut between me and him. The man sleeping in that bed wasn't the Silas I archived in my memory. He was a stranger wearing my husband's skin. The hallway was dark, lit only by the glow of the security keypad, and I felt like a burglar in my own home, sneaking away from the crime scene. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. So loud I was sure it would wake up the whole house. I needed to get out of that hallway. I needed air. I needed light. I needed the truth in a format I could quantify. I turned left and went into the study. That room always smelled like old paper and lemon polish, but tonight it just smelled like lies. I sat in the leather chair behind Silas's desk. The desk he said was for paying bills, but now I know it was for managing his double life. I pulled my iPhone out of my robe pocket. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it on the hardwood. It was 2:33 a.m. I stared at the screen, at the photo of my daughter Sonia smiling in the sun, and I pressed the call button. It rang 4 times, 5 times. I was just about to hang up thinking, Eloise, you've lost your mind. She's asleep in Atlanta. When a sleepy voice answered, she said, Mama, is everything okay? You never called this late? I didn't even say hello. I just said, Sonia, I need you to get your laptop right now. I could hear her moving, the rustle of sheets, the click of a lamp switch. Her voice changed instantly from sleepy to sharp. She's an investigator for the state, digital forensics. She knows that tone. She said, What's happened? Are you hurt? I said, No, but I need you to log into the family iCloud account, the one Daddy made us all share for safety. She paused and I heard the clack of a keyboard. I'm in, she said. I'm looking at the device list. His iPhone is active. It's showing right here in Savannah. Gordonston. I gripped the armrests of the chair until my knuckles turned white. I don't care where he is right now, I whispered. I need to know where he was. Pull up the significant locations feature. Can you see the history? There was a long silence. Just the hum of the phone line and the sound of the air conditioner vent rattling in the ceiling. I pictured Sonia in her apartment, squinting at the screen, her glasses slipping down her nose. Finally, she said, Mama, this is a lot of data. He didn't turn off his location tracking. He never thought we'd look. Go back, I said. Go back to September the 14th. She typed something. Okay, September 14th. He left Savannah at 8 a.m. He drove up I-16, got on I-75. He stopped in. Wait, let me zoom in. He didn't go to Charleston, Mama. He went to Atlanta. I know, I said, my voice cracking. Tell me where he went. It's a residential area, she said. Marietta, near the square. He parked there at 4 p.m. and stayed until midnight. My stomach turned over. That was the wedding, the ceremony, the reception, the hotel room. He parked his life in Marietta for 8 hours while I sat here worrying if he'd hit traffic. Keep looking, I said. Don't stop at the 14th. Look at the pattern. Look at the last year. I heard her breathing change. A sharp intake of breath. Oh my God, she whispered. What? I demanded. What is it? It's not just trips, Mama. It's a commute, she said. Look at this heat map. It's everywhere in this one subdivision. The Westchester at East Cobb. My phone buzzed in my hand. A screenshot. I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. It was a map of Marietta covered in hundreds of red dots. A dense, bright cluster of deception right off the Roswell Road exit. Mama, Sonia said, her voice trembling now. These are regular, like clockwork. She read the timestamps to me, and with every number, she hammered another nail into the coffin of my marriage. Tuesday, October 3rd. Arrival 6:15 p.m. Departure 10 p.m. Thursday, October 5th. Arrival 6 summons p.m. Departure 10,015 p.m. Tuesday, October 10th. Same thing. Thursday, October 12th. Same thing. 2 years. He had been doing this for 2 years. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, he'd come home from work, kiss me on the cheek, pour himself a glass of sweet tea, and tell me he was going to the downtown bridge club or the Masonic Lodge, or to help Beverly, that poor imaginary widow with the leaky roof. I sat there in the dark looking at those red dots on my screen, and I realized something that made me want to scream until the window shattered. He wasn't playing bridge. He wasn't helping a widow. He was living a whole different life in the suburbs. He was clocking in for his shift as a husband to another woman. 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Prime time, dinner time, homework time. He was there for the mundane, beautiful parts of a life that I was excluded from. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh, and it stretched all the way back to the Reagan administration. I looked at the timestamp on the last entry Sonia sent me. It was from last week, Tuesday. He had left that house at 10:04 p.m. and gotten home to me at 11:30 p.m., claiming the bridge game ran late. He smelled like peaches when he walked through the door. I told him he smelled like a church lady. He laughed and said, "Must be the air freshener in Beverly's car." There is no Beverly. There never was. There's just a house in Marietta with a white picket fence. And a driveway where my husband's car parked twice a week for 2 years. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my reality. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't even turn off the coffee pot. I just grabbed my keys, my purse, and the phone with that damning screenshot glowing like a hot spot in the dark. I walked out of the Gordonston townhouse at 3:15 a.m. and I didn't look back. If Silas woke up, let him wonder. Let him spin in the bed I made for 38 years and find the cold side of the mattress. I got into my car, a sensible silver sedan we bought when Sonia graduated college, and I just drove north toward the red dots. You know that feeling when you're driving on a highway in the dead of night? It's hypnotic. I-16 stretches out in front of you like a black ribbon cutting through the swamp, and there's this rhythmic hum from the tires that syncs up with your heartbeat. I had the windows cracked just an inch. The air rushing in was cool, damp, and smelled like pine straw and asphalt. It didn't smell like peaches. Thank God for small mercies. But every time I shifted gears, I expected that scent to hit me. I expected him to be sitting in the passenger seat, tapping his fingers on his knee, telling me I was overreacting. But he wasn't there. Just me and the dark and the ticking of the odometer. It takes 4 hours to get to Marietta if you push it. 4 hours to traverse the state, leaving the Spanish moss of Savannah behind for the sterile, manicured suburbs of Atlanta. I spent every mile of those 4 hours rehearsing a speech I knew I'd never give. It was a duel in my head. 1 minute, I was a screaming banshee, imagining myself banging on the door at 4 a.m., screaming, "How dare you? How dare you rewrite our history without filing a divorce?" I wanted to be loud. I wanted to be the kind of woman who shatters windows. But then, the archivist brain would take over. The steel spine would straighten. I'd think about the timeline. 2 years. That's roughly 100 Tuesdays and 100 Thursdays. I started calculating the mileage, the gas receipts, the wear and tear on his tires, while I was at the Georgia Historical Society dusting the letters of Civil War widows. He was driving this exact stretch of I-75, laughing at a joke I wasn't meant to hear. I thought about the cash. $30,200 for a suit. Paid in bills he probably withdrew in dribs and drabs so I wouldn't notice. The deception was so bureaucratic. It was efficient. It was cold. I stopped for gas in Macon around 4:45 a.m. The neon sign of the pilot station buzzed overhead, that annoying electric mosquito sound. I pumped the gas 45 toned to fill the tank and watched the numbers tick up. I realized I was paying out of our joint account to drive to the house he bought with the money he stole from me. The irony tasted like bile in the back of my throat. I went inside and bought a bottle of water and a pack of salted peanuts. The clerk didn't look at me. He was half asleep, watching a tiny TV behind the counter. I was just another gray-haired woman in a trench coat passing through at dawn. Invisible. That's what Silas made me. A ghost in his own machine. By the time I hit the perimeter, the sun was coming up. Not the golden Savannah sunrise that turns the river pink. This was a hard gray light filtering through the Atlanta smog. I followed the GPS directions Sonia had texted me. Exit 265, South Marietta, the Westchester East Cobb. The name sounds expensive, doesn't it? It implies gates and uniformed guards. Wasn't like that. It was just winding roads and curbs that were too perfect. I turned onto Cedar Trace Lane. The street was quiet. Too quiet. It was Tuesday morning. The world was waking up, getting ready for work and school, but this street felt suspended in time. I slowed the car down, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was looking for numbers, 2448, 2450, and then I saw it. I pulled over to the curb and killed the engine. The silence that rushed into the car was heavy, suffocating. I sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house across the street. It wasn't a dark, seductive den of sin. It wasn't a bachelor pad overlooking the city. It was a beige ranch house, brick, white trim, a 2-car garage with a basketball hoop over the driveway. There were rose bushes in the front yard, mulched with fresh wood chips. There was a wreath on the front door, a grapevine one with fake berries. It wasn't a love nest. It looked like a home. And that was the worst part of all. You ever sat in a car so long the leather seat starts to feel like a second skin? That was me. Dawn had broken about an hour ago, but the air was already getting thick. That heavy Georgia heat that sits on your chest like a wet wool blanket. I hadn't moved. I hadn't even blinked much. I just watched that beige brick house across the street, 2450 Cedar Trace Lane. I reached into my purse and my fingers brushed against that crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out, smoothing it against my knee for the 100th time. It was a receipt from a dry cleaner here in Marietta, Clean King Dry Cleaners. Men's large classic fit suit, $12.50. I remembered the moment I found it. Silas doesn't use dry cleaners for his everyday suits. He uses the ones near the office in Savannah. But this was Marietta. The ink was dry, but the lye was fresh, even back then. I tucked it away in the glove box right next to my registration. Another piece of evidence filed away for a trial nobody else knew was happening. Around 4:45 p.m., the silence on the street broke. I heard the rumble of an engine before I saw it. A black Ford pickup truck turned the corner, slow and easy. My heart did this stutter step thing against my ribs. I knew that truck. I knew the specific dent in the rear bumper, the little parking permit sticker from the hospital. It was him. He pulled into the driveway of the beige house, not a guest spot, right in the middle, like he lived there. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it on the floor mat. I hit record, holding my breath, watching the screen through the passenger side window. He stepped out. He wasn't wearing that gray suit I hate, the one that makes him look like a tired accountant. He was wearing jeans, actually, and a soft blue button-down that looked brand new. And then he smiled. He reached behind the seat and grabbed a brown paper grocery bag. You know the kind, the fancy kind with the twisted handles. He walked up that driveway with a spring in his step, a lightness I haven't seen in 10 years. He stopped at the front door and he looked up. Not at the doorbell, but at the window. He looked right at the glass, and his face softened. It was a look of pure, unadulterated anticipation. He was happy to be there. He was rushing to get inside. I watched him through the tiny screen of my iPhone, feeling like a voyeur in my own marriage. I paused the video. The image froze. My husband of 38 years carrying groceries for a stranger, looking like a man who was exactly where he belonged. That smile. I used to get that smile. When did I stop being the person he smiled at? It was 7:45 p.m. and the hydrangeas in the yard started to look like gray ghosts in the dusk. The humidity in Marietta is different than Savannah. It's a drier heat, but it still sits on your chest like a heavy wool coat. I'd been sitting in that rental car for 3 hours. My throat was parchment dry. I had finished the lukewarm bottle of water an hour ago. Every instinct I had, every bit of professional discipline from 30 years in the archives was screaming at me to catalog this from a distance, to observe, record, and withdraw. But I couldn't. The archive was too far away. I was standing in the exhibit now. I opened the car door. The hinge groaned, a sharp sound in the quiet suburb. I stepped out onto the asphalt. The crickets were deafening, a rhythmic wall of sound that only made the silence of that beige brick house feel more oppressive. I walked up the driveway. I remember thinking how perfectly aligned the bricks were. No cracks, no weeds, just like the lie Silas had been living. I stepped onto the porch. The wood was painted a pristine gray, freshly done, probably last weekend. There was a wreath on the door grapevine, with those fake dusty Miller stems. I reached out. My hand was shaking. Not a little tremble, a full-blown palsy of rage and fear. I pressed the doorbell. It didn't make a sound. Or maybe it did, and I just couldn't hear it over the blood rushing in my ears. I waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I pressed it again, longer this time. I told myself if nobody answered, I would leave. I would walk away. But then I heard it, the shuffle of slippers on hardwood, the distinct click of a deadbolt sliding back. The handle turned. The door swung open and the light from inside hit me like a physical blow. It was warm. It smelled like garlic, onions, and peaches. She was standing there. She looked younger than me, but not by much. She was wearing a pink Williams-Sonoma apron, the kind with the adjustable neck strap, and in her hand, she held a gray silicone spatula. I must have looked like a disaster. Linen pants wrinkled from sitting, sweat stains under the arms, hair frizzing in the evening damp. She didn't look scared. She didn't look guilty. She looked hospitable. She wiped her hands on the apron and gave me a polite, curious smile. She said, "Oh, you must be the cleaning lady. Silas said you might come by." Cleaning lady. The words hung there in the humid Georgia air, heavier than the pollen dusting the porch. I just looked at her, standing there in that pristine Williams-Sonoma apron, holding that gray silicone spatula like it was a scepter. She looked so comfortable. She looked like she belonged in a way I haven't felt in my own kitchen in years. Can you believe that? 4 hours of driving on I-16, staring at taillights and chain restaurants, just to be reduced to hired help. I could feel the sweat pooling at the base of my spine, soaking into my good silk blouse. I looked like a mess. I looked like a woman who had been living in a car for 6 hours. And she looked like a magazine cover. The smell of peaches and gardenias rolled out of the house like a toxic fog, choking me. It was the same scent from the candle, the same scent on his suit, but concentrated here. I smoothed down the front of my coat, feeling the crinkle of the dry cleaning plastic I hadn't quite removed from the sleeve. I took a breath that tasted like exhaust fumes and betrayal. I looked her dead in the eye. I wanted to make sure the file was stamped correctly. I said, "No, I'm not the cleaning lady." She smiled, this polite, confused little smile. She tilted her head. "Oh?" Silas says a lot of things. I cut her off. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like ice cracking on a river. "I'm Eloise. I'm Silas's wife. You should have seen it. It was like watching a flower dying in fast motion." The color just streamed out of her face, leaving her pale as the magnolia blossoms on the wreath behind her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The spatula wobbled in her hand. She was processing the data, trying to fit this new variable into her equation, and the math wasn't working. She lifted my left hand. I saw her eyes dart to the diamond ring Silas gave me for our 30th anniversary, the one that was suddenly weighing a ton. And then I heard him. I heard the sound of a heavy shoe on hardwood. The squeak of a floorboard I knew intimately because he complains about the one in our hallway in Savannah. He came around the corner, wiping his hands on a dish towel, looking relaxed, looking at home. He was holding a glass of red wine, Pinot Noir, I think. It looked expensive. He walked right up behind her, probably to kiss her neck, probably to ask what was taking so long with the door. He said, "Maribel, who is it? Did the service send Symbolver?" He saw me. The glass didn't slip from his fingers. It didn't tumble in slow motion. His hand just opened. The red wine hit the hardwood floor with a violence that startled us all. The crystal shattered, sending shards spinning across the pristine entryway. A stain spread instantly, looking like blood on a crime scene tape. I looked at him. I waited for the shock. I waited for the panic. I waited for the man I married to look at me with remorse. But do you know what I saw? I didn't see surprise. I didn't see a man caught in a lie. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who knew this day was coming eventually. You know that sound? That specific high-pitched shriek of crystal shattering against a hardwood floor? It doesn't just sound like glass breaking, it sounds like a timeline snapping. That sound echoed through the foyer of 2450 Cedar Trace Lane, bouncing off the pristine walls. And nobody moved. I mean, nobody moved a muscle. Silas just stood there looking at the pool of Pinot Noir spreading across the floorboards. And he didn't even blink. He just looked resigned, like he had been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 2 years. But it wasn't him that broke the silence. It was her, Maribel, the woman standing in the Williams-Sonoma apron, holding a gray silicone spatula like it was a weapon. She looked at Silas, then she looked at me, and I watched the realization wash over her face. It was slow and terrible, like a tide coming in. She saw the wedding band on my left hand. She saw the resemblance in our jawlines, the way we both stood with our weight on our right hips. She knew, and in that moment, I wasn't the enemy anymore. I was just the other casualty. She set the spatula down on the counter with a clatter that was louder than the glass, and she looked at Silas with a gaze that could have frozen the humidity in the air. She said, "You told me she was dead." I felt the air leave my lungs. Dead? I was standing right there, breathing in the scent of her gardenias, and the ghost of his betrayal sweating in a rental car blouse, and he told her I was dead? Silas opened his mouth, a fish gasping for water on a dock, but no sound came out. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, shrinking in on himself. Maribel didn't wait for his excuse. She turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed and wide, and she actually gestured toward the kitchen table. She said, "Come in, you need to see this." I walked across that threshold, stepping over the broken glass, leaving the safety of the porch for the claustrophobic warmth of a home that was stolen from me. The kitchen was immaculate. There was a pot of something bubbling on the stove. Smelled like rosemary and thyme and fresh hydrangeas in a vase on the island. It was a home, a real lived-in home. Not the mausoleum of silence our place in Gordonston had become. She walked over to the hutch and pulled out a heavy leather album. The kind you order from a high-end boutique, not a drugstore. She slammed it onto the kitchen table, the impact making the silverware rattle. "Look," she said, "just look." I opened the cover, and there it was, a professional photograph taken on a beach. The sand was white as sugar, the ocean a blur of turquoise behind them, and there was Silas. But it wasn't the Silas I knew. The Silas I lived with was tired, burdened, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. This Silas, he was laughing. Head thrown back, eyes crinkled, wearing a linen shirt that was unbuttoned just a little too low. And he was holding Maribel, dipping her back like they were in a movie musical. The timestamp on the corner of the photo was August 12, 2015. 2015. I remembered 2015. Silas told me he was in Macon for a 6-week archival project for the state. He was gone for weeks at a time. He came back smelling like salt air and expensive hotel soap. And I told myself it was just the marsh. I was such a fool. I touched the photo. The laminate was smooth under my fingertip. He looked lighter, unburdened, because in this picture he didn't have a wife named Eloise. He had told her I was gone, erased. But it got worse, because then she reached under the album and pulled out a sheaf of papers, legal documents. She slid them across the table toward me, her hand trembling so hard the papers rattled against the wood. "He showed me these the week after we met," she whispered. "He said he didn't like to talk about it, said it was too painful." I looked down. I know my way around a document. I spent 38 years preserving history, authenticating signatures, spotting forgeries. I know what a Chatham County seal looks like. I know what a judge's signature looks like. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that these were fake, but they were good fakes, high quality. Decree of divorce, finalized December 14, 2015. Irreconcilable differences. Property settlement agreement. It listed our townhouse, my townhouse, as sold and proceeds dispersed. It listed me as remanded to residence of sister in Charleston. My sister died in 2009. He didn't just lie to her. He constructed an entire alternate reality where I didn't exist. Or where I was conveniently out of the picture, freeing him up to play house in Marietta. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh. I looked up at Silas, who was still standing in the puddle of red wine. "You forged these?" I asked him. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like steel. "You spent, what? How much money on a lawyer to draft fake papers? Or did you do it yourself on the office copier?" He just stared at the floor. He couldn't even look at us, and then I looked at Maribel. She was crying. Not screaming, not throwing things, just weeping, silently, big fat tears rolling down her cheeks. And splashing onto her pink apron, I saw the woman who bought the peaches. I saw the woman who cooked him dinner every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years. I saw the woman who believed she was marrying a widower or a divorcee, a man starting over. She wasn't a homewrecker. She was a mark, just like me. I reached across the table and I put my hand over hers. It was a strange sensation, touching the skin of the woman my husband loved. But her hand was cold. Mine was warm. We were 2 points on a triangle that didn't exist, drawn by a man who didn't exist either. I squeezed her hand. He didn't just cheat on me, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He gaslit her into thinking he was free. We were both victims of the same con. We stood there, a triangle of silence in that living room that smelled faintly of lemon pledge and peaches. Maribel's hand was still in mine, and I could feel her pulse racing, matching the frantic thud of my own heart. We had him. We had Silas cornered with his forged papers and his lies, and for a moment, just a split second, I felt victorious. I felt like the archivist who finally found the missing page that ruined the villain's story. But then, the house groaned. I swear to you, I heard the wood flooring pop on the staircase overhead. A heavy, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud, thud. Not a pet. A person. Maribel looked up, confused, and whispered, That's just the TV. But it wasn't. Then I saw him. He appeared at the top of the staircase, framed by the warm yellow light of the second-floor hallway. A boy. 14, maybe 15 years old. Tall and lanky, wearing a faded red hoodie and those oversized headphones that kids wear like armor around their necks. He was holding a half-eaten bag of Doritos, orange dust on his fingertips. He stopped mid-chew. He looked at me, a stranger in his mother's living room. Then he looked at Silas, and his face lit up with that lazy, comfortable recognition that only a child has for a parent. He said, Dad? You're home early. The word dad hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The air left the room. My ears started ringing, that high-pitched squeal you get when a plane takes off. I stared at him. I really looked at him, and I saw it. I saw Silas. I saw the bridge of his nose, that slight noble arch that Silas hated, but I always loved. I saw the shape of his jawline, square and determined. I saw the way he stood with his weight shifted to one hip, exactly like Silas does when he's waiting for the microwave. My brain was scrambling, trying to file this new evidence, trying to make the math work. 14 years old. That means he was born in 2010? 2009? I was doing the mental arithmetic so fast my head hurt. 2009. We were in Savannah. We were going to the fertility specialist in Atlanta every month. I was taking the shots, the pills, the hormones that made me crazy and bloated. Silas was holding my hand in the waiting room, telling me it didn't matter if we couldn't have our own, that we would adopt. We adopted Sonia 2 years later. He wasn't just lying about her divorce. He wasn't just stealing money for a house. He was building the dynasty he told me he didn't need. I looked at Silas. I expected to see guilt. I expected to see shame. But what I saw terrified me. He was looking at that boy with a softness, a pride, that he had never shown to Sonia. He was looking at his own flesh and blood, the biological legacy I failed to give him. The boy looked back at me, squinting a little. Mom, who's this? Maribel didn't answer. She couldn't. She was looking at Silas too, and I saw the realization dawning on her face, the same calculation happening in her head. She was the vessel. I was the failure. I felt the blood drain from my face, cold and clammy. My knees actually buckled. I reached out and grabbed the back of the sofa to keep from hitting the floor. The room started to tilt. The smell of the peaches, which I now realized was the smell of her, suddenly made me sick. It was the smell of them, of this house. It wasn't just perfume. It was the smell of a life where Silas got everything he wanted. A son, a young wife, a fresh start, and I was just the prologue. I was the practice run. I looked at the boy's hand, the orange dust on his fingers. I looked at Silas's mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, and I realized the sheer scale of the con. It wasn't just about money. It was about biology. It was about the one thing I couldn't give him. It was about the one thing I couldn't give him. I spent 30 years thinking we were a team. I was just the incubator for the child he really wanted. And when biology didn't work, he found someone else. I couldn't breathe in that foyer. The air was too thick, heavy with the smell of peaches, and the sudden suffocating weight of a reality I wasn't ready for. That boy standing there with orange dust on his fingers and Silas's jawline. I looked at him and saw a ghost. I saw the child I couldn't give him. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh, and it was staring me right in the face. I was the practice friend. I was the rough draft before the final publication. So I turned around and I walked out. I pushed past Maribel, who was standing there clutching that spatula like a weapon, and I walked straight out into the humid Georgia night. The air hit me like a wet towel. It was 80 degrees easy, even at 8 o'clock. And the humidity was just sitting on my skin. I could smell the fresh mulch in the flower beds, that sharp, earthy scent of a manicured garden. And somewhere in the distance I heard the low, constant hum of traffic on I-75. It sounded like the ocean, but angry. I made it to the edge of the driveway before my knees started to buckle. I grabbed the lamppost. The metal was warm, buzzing with electricity. I told myself I wasn't going to fall. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then I heard the screen door slap shut. Slow. Deliberate. He didn't run after me. He walked. I turned around and there he was. My husband. A stranger. He was wearing that navy blue polo shirt from the Macy's on Abercorn Extension. I remember buying it for him 2 Christmases ago. It had a tiny coffee stain on the collar right there. I wondered if she made that coffee. I wondered if he sat at her table and let her wash his clothes and pretend he was a good man. Eloise, he said. His voice was that same low rumble, the one that used to read me to sleep. Now it just made me sick. Don't, I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like metal scraping against concrete. Don't you dare say my name like you know who I am. I pointed a shaking finger at the house, at that bright yellow door with the ridiculous grapevine wreath. Tell me about the boy. Tell me about the son. Silas looked at the house, then back at me. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look guilty. He looked resolved, like he'd been waiting for the bill to come due. He is my son, Eloise. You have a daughter, I screamed. I didn't care if the neighbors heard. Let them hear. Let the whole damn subdivision hear. We have Sonia. We adopted her because we said biology didn't matter. We said love was enough. Exactly, he said. He cut me off. He actually cut me off. The silence that followed was louder than the scream. Even the crickets seemed to stop. He took a step toward me, closing the distance, and reached out. His hand clamped around my arm, right above the elbow. It wasn't violent, but it was firm, possessive. It was the way a man guides a stubborn client through a doorway. I felt the heat of his palm through my sleeve, and I was flooded with a hot, violent wave of disgust. I jerked back so hard I almost tripped over the curb. Don't touch me, I hissed. Do not put your hands on me. He dropped his hand, sighing like I was being unreasonable. Maribel, she could give me what you couldn't, he said, his voice so incredibly calm. A legacy, a biological heir, someone to carry the name forward. And what was I asked him. My throat burned, like I'd swallowed broken glass. What was I for 38 years? A placeholder? A draft you kept editing until you got it right? You were my foundation, he said, and the sickening thing, he meant it as a compliment. I loved you, Eloise, I did, but I needed more. I deserved to be happy. Isn't that what marriage is about? Happiness? You didn't want a marriage, Silas. You wanted lives. Plural, I said. You wanted 2 houses, 2 wives, 2 sets of lies. You filed us away in different cabinets and thought we'd never touch. I did what I had to do, he insisted, smoothing the front of that stained shirt. I compartmentalized. I managed the assets. It was working perfectly. It would have kept working if you hadn't started digging through those files like a bored detective. He looked at me, and there was no apology in his eyes. There was only cold, hard calculation. He was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved, a discrepancy in the ledger he needed to write off. I love you both, he said, spreading his hands like he was preaching a sermon. Is that so hard to believe? Can't a man need 2 different things? You gave me stability. She gives me life. I stood there on that perfectly manicured lawn, the streetlight flickering overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across his face. I thought about all the nights I sat up waiting, the love, the years I spent preserving our history in the archives, dusting off the memories, making sure they were safe. And he was just building a new shelf. He didn't apologize, he explained, as if I was a business partner he was buying out. I don't remember the drive home. Not really. I know I must have driven, because the car was in the driveway when the fog lifted. Just static, white noise, like when you turn the television to a channel that doesn't exist. I-16 South is a straight shot of pine trees and asphalt. But that night, it felt like I was driving through the bottom of the ocean. The pressure was crushing. I remember seeing the rain start. It wasn't a storm, just that steady, miserable Georgia drizzle that makes everything slick and gray. The wipers were slapping against the windshield. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Keeping time with the heartbeat I could feel hammering in my throat. I had the air conditioning blasting because I felt sick, hot, and cold at the same time. My hands were gripping the leather steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I remember looking at them and thinking, those look like old lady hands. Who is this old lady driving this car? I kept seeing his face, that look of boredom, that pure, unadulterated indifference when he called me an asset. He didn't even have the decency to be angry. He wasn't sorry. He was just annoyed that the math wasn't working out anymore. That's what I was to him. A line item that had gone rogue. A miscalculation. I reached over to the passenger seat at one point, don't ask me why, and I touched the receipt for the Milan tailor suit. $3,200. Cash. He paid cash for a suit to marry her while I was at home clipping coupons for the grocery store. I felt the paper between my fingers, crisp and sharp. I wanted to tear it up. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just put it back in my purse. I filed it away, because that's what I do. I keep the records, even the ones that kill me. I thought about calling Sonia. My thumb hovered over her name on the screen. The blue light from the dashboard was washing over my face, making me look like a ghost. I could see her contact picture, her and her little boy. My grandson smiling. What would I say? No, I couldn't do that. I couldn't drop that bomb on her in the middle of the night. I needed to process this. I needed to put it in a box before I handed it to her. So I put the phone down. I left it in the cup holder. Dark and silent. By the time I hit the outskirts of Savannah, the rain had stopped, but the air was still thick. That heavy, humid weight that settles in your chest. It was almost 1,000 in the morning. The streets were empty. I drove down Abercorn, past the squares, the moss hanging off the oak trees like wet gray rags. It looked beautiful, in a terrible, mournful way. I pulled into the driveway of the townhouse. The one Silas promised me was going to be our forever home. The bricks were red. The door was black. It looked exactly the same as it did when I left. But I knew it wasn't. It was a prop. It was a stage set for a play I'd been acting in for 38 years. Without knowing the plot. I turned off the engine. The silence was loud. It rang in my ears. I sat there for a long time, staring at the front door. I was waiting for the rage to come back. The screaming, the throwing things, the wanting to burn his world down. But it didn't come. Just that empty, hollow ache. I realized then that I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to pack a bag and go to a hotel. I wasn't going to wake up the neighbors. I was going to walk inside, take off my shoes, and wait. I wanted to see if he could do it. I wanted to see if he could walk through that door, look me in the eye, kiss my cheek, and lie to me one last time. I needed to know if the man I married was ever real, or if he was just the best actor I ever met. When I finally walked through our front door, the house felt like a museum exhibit. A monument to a life that didn't exist. For 3 days, this townhouse was a tomb, not a crypt, not a grave, a tomb. Airless. Still. I walked from room to room just to hear the floorboards creak, to prove I was still the ghost. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the granite countertop, watching the dust motes dance in the light. I was cataloging everything, the way the silence hummed at 60 hertz, the smell of lemon polish. I told myself I was just waiting for the archive to close, but really, I was just steeling my spine for the next entry in the file. Then on Wednesday, the lock turned. You know that sound, the heavy metallic click of a dead bolt sliding back? It wasn't a surprise. I'd been waiting for it. The handle turned, and there he was. Silas, my husband of 38 years. A stranger. He walked in like he'd just been to the office, or the Masonic Lodge. He was wearing that navy blue polo shirt, the one I know now is his dad uniform. And he was carrying a brown paper grocery bag, the kind with twisted handles. "Hey, Elle," he said. Just like that. Casual. Breezy, like he hadn't shattered my entire existence 3 days ago. I didn't stand up. I just watched him. Watched the way his eyes scanned the room. Checking for... what? Damage? Police? Me? Traffic on I-16 was murder coming back, he said. He set the bag down, and then the smell hit me. It rolled off him in waves, suffocatingly thick. It wasn't just the sweet fermenting scent of fresh fruit. It was her. It was that cloying gardenia fragrance. He reeked of her house. He reeked of that life in Marietta, and he was trying to mask it with peaches. The audacity was so profound, for a second I honestly thought I might laugh out loud. Hysterical, right? But instead I felt my stomach turn over. Hot acid rising in my throat. Suppressed vomit. "Look at these," he said, pulling a peach from the bag. It was fuzzy, mottled red and yellow. He held it out to me like an offering, a peace treaty. "Got them fresh?" Still warm from the sun. I looked at that piece of fruit. I looked at his hand, the hand that held that other woman's hand, the hand that signed those forged documents. I forced myself to breathe. I couldn't let him know. Not yet. The archivist in me? She knows you don't tip your hand until you have the evidence filed. And the case closed. So I played along. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I reached out. My hand didn't shake. I took that peach. The skin was warm. Just like he said. It felt disgusting. "That was thoughtful of you, Silas," I whispered. My voice sounded like someone else's. Then Reedy. He beamed. He actually beamed at me. He came around the island, closing the distance. I froze. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath, and under that, the faint, sticky sweetness of her perfume on his collar. He kissed my cheek, a wet, lingering kiss. It felt like a slug trail. He pulled back, looking me right in the eye with those dead, shark eyes. "I missed you, Elle," he said. And the scary part was, he almost sounded like he meant it. 3:00 in the morning. The house was absolutely silent, except for that low, rattling hum the air conditioning makes when it's fighting a losing battle against the Savannah humidity. I was lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan, watching the blades slice through the shadows. Silas was asleep next to me. He was breathing deep, that rhythmic, heavy sound of a man who has absolutely no conscience bothering his rest. I turned my head slowly on the pillow. On the nightstand, right next to his glasses, was the little brass tray where he dumps his pocket contents every single night. Change, a lighter, and his keys. He usually keeps them in his pants, draped over the chair. But tonight, he was tired. The 4-hour drive from Marietta will do that to you. I reached out. My fingers were shaking so badly I almost knocked the tray over. I had to stop, breathe. I told myself, "Eloise, you are the head archivist. You have handled documents from the Civil War without trembling. You can do this." I touched the metal. It was cold. I found the small silver key, the safety deposit box key, the one he's kept hidden for 20 years. I slid it off the ring. It didn't make a sound. I closed my fist around it and just held it there. It bit into my palm. I was holding the end of my life, and I didn't even know it yet. I was at First Citizens Bank the minute they unlocked the doors at 9 a.m. I parked in the garage in York Street because I didn't want him to drive past and see my car in Broughton. Paranoia? Maybe. But after what I found in Marietta, paranoia is just good survival instincts. I walked in wearing my sunglasses. I know it's rude. I know the tellers were wondering who this crazy woman is wearing dark lenses inside. But I needed a shield. I needed to hide my eyes because I knew if I looked at anyone, the truth would just spill out of me. I went up to the counter and asked for box 402. The young manager, a guy named Kevin who looked about 12 years old, led me back to the vault. The air smelled like old paper and steel and cleaning solvent. We went into the little privacy room, the one with the frosted glass door that closes you in. He slid the metal box into the slot and locked the outer door, leaving me alone in there. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat down. The leather chair was cold. I put the key in the lock, turned it left, pop. The lid came up. I wasn't sure what I expected. Cash, maybe. Stacks of $100 bills. Or maybe more photos. Receipts. But what I found, it was worse. It was paper. Cream-colored, heavy bond paper with a letterhead from a law firm in Atlanta. I picked it up. The date on the top was August 15th. 3 months ago. 3 months ago, we were sitting on the back porch drinking sweet tea and he was drafting this. I started reading the words. Last will and testament of Silas Osei-Mensah. I scanned the text looking for my name, looking for Sonia. It wasn't there. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh. I got to paragraph 3. I devise and bequeath all my real property, liquid assets, and holdings to Maribel Castellano and Julian Osei-Mensah, to be held in trust until the latter reaches the age of 25. I felt the blood drain out of my face. My hands went numb. The paper started rattling because I was trembling so hard. I kept reading, hoping for a codicil. A mistake. But then I saw paragraph 4. In the event of my death, it is my specific instruction that the current residents of the Savannah property be served with a notice to vacate within 30 days of interment. I read it again. Current residents. He didn't say my wife. He didn't say my family. He used the same language you use for tenants. For squatters. This house, my grandmother bought this house in 1952, and he had written the legal document to throw me out into the street the moment he died. I sat in that little cold room at First Citizens Bank, holding a piece of paper that cost less than $1 to print, and I realized I wasn't his wife. I was a line item he hadn't managed to delete yet. He wasn't just leaving me, he was evicting me from my own life. I walked back into the townhouse at 8:45 a.m., and the silence hit me like a physical weight. The air conditioner was humming that low, steady thrum that sounds like a heartbeat dying in the walls. Silas was upstairs in the shower. I could hear the water hitting the tiles, that rhythmic drumming that used to sound so domestic, so safe, but now just sounded like he was washing off the evidence of his other life. I had exactly 4 minutes to return the safety deposit key before he came down looking for his coffee. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the ring. I slipped the little silver key back onto the brass hook right where I found it, next to the spare key for the sedan he doesn't even drive anymore. I froze. I listened for the water to stop. It didn't. I exhaled, but I couldn't breathe. The air in this house, it felt toxic, like I was inhaling poison. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went straight to the study. That's where the filing cabinet is. That ugly gray metal beast that Silas spent the entire month of August reorganizing. He told me he was shredding old tax returns from the 90s to make space for our retirement planning. He stood right there in this doorway and said, "You know how you get when the files are messy, Elle. I'm just helping you keep the archive clean." He wasn't organizing. He was curating. He was removing the documents that proved I existed. But he missed something. Or maybe, in his arrogance, he thought I was too stupid to look past the first layer of hanging folders. I sat down in the leather chair. It still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, but underneath that there was this faint chemical scent of peaches. It made my stomach turn. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Kevin. Kevin is a forensic accountant I used to work with back when I was cataloging the city's maritime records at the Historical Society. He knows numbers. He knows where bodies are buried in ledgers. I didn't say hello. I just said, "I need you to pull the title work on 12 West Gordon Street right now." I could hear him typing in the background. The clack of the keys sounded like a gavel. "Eloise," he said, his voice dropped. That low register people use when they're in the hospital waiting room. "There's a home equity line of credit recorded on August 15th. The max draw is $400,000. I closed my eyes. $400,000. My grandmother's china didn't cost that much. The roof repairs, the new HVAC, the flood insurance, none of it cost that much. The entire history of this family condensed into a single debt line. I opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet. Silas had labeled it insurance in his neat, precise block letters. Inside, nestled between the life insurance policy he took out on me without telling me and the car insurance for a car he sold years ago, was a bank statement. First Citizens Bank, dated September 1st. I pulled it out. The paper felt slick, greasy almost. I looked at the balance. It showed a transfer, $400,000 wired out. Destination, a Wells Fargo checking account in Marietta, Georgia. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Negative balance. Available credit, 0. The house wasn't ours. The house was collateral. He had leveraged the only thing my grandfather left me, the roof over my head, to pay for... what? A wedding for Maribel? A down payment on that brick ranch with the basketball hoop? I ran my finger over the date. August 15th. That was the same day he signed the will leaving everything to them. He didn't just leave me. He cannibalized our life to pay for his exit. You don't do this in a week. This takes planning. This takes cold, calculated malice. I remembered him sitting at this very desk, feeding papers into the shredder for hours, that satisfied little smile on his face, while I made dinner in the next room. I asked him what he was doing. He looked at me and said, "Just taking care of us, Elle. Just making sure the archive is clean." He was burning down my financial history to keep his other life warm, and the most terrifying part, he didn't even blink. He looked at a woman who devoted 38 years to him, and he saw a bank account he could drain. I sat there listening to the mantle clock tick. Every second was a second closer to eviction. Every tick was a nail in the coffin of my future. I'm not an idiot. I know how money works. But I didn't know how he worked. I didn't know I was married to a thief. I looked at the statement again. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh. He stole the equity my grandfather built with his own hands to pay for a mortgage that doesn't even have my name on it. You know how when you're an archivist, you develop this sense for layers? Like peeling an onion, but with paper and ink, and the smell of old things that won't ever be new again. I was sitting there in that leather chair, holding the bank statement that had just blown my life apart, and I realized something was missing. There was a gap in the filing, a void in the narrative. When I'd opened box 402, I'd pulled out the will first, saw that cream-colored paper with the Atlanta law firm letterhead, and my heart had stopped cold. But there was something behind it. Something I'd shoved into my purse without really looking at, because the will, that piece of paper telling me I was being evicted from my own grandmother's home, had taken up all the oxygen in the room. I reached into my leather bag now, my fingers brushing against the silk lining, and I pulled it out. A standard manila envelope, no markings on the front. Just a clinical medical-grade seal across the back, the kind that makes you nervous before you even break it. The air in the study felt heavy. That Savannah humidity that wraps around you like a wet wool blanket, even with the air conditioning humming against the wall. I looked at the clock on the mantel, 8:47 a.m. I could hear the water still running upstairs. Silas was in the shower, washing off the scent of her house, washing off the peach and gardenia perfume, washing off the lie. I remember thinking, what else could there possibly be? He'd already taken the money. He'd already given away the house. He'd already disinherited our daughter. What was left to take? My breath caught in my throat. You don't lose things in an archive. You just misfile them. But this wasn't misfiled. This was hidden. I slid my finger under the seal. The sound it made, that tearing of paper, echoed in the silence. I pulled out the documents. 3 pages. Letterhead from the Winship Cancer Institute at Emory. Date October 14th, 2 years ago. 2 years. I sat there staring at that date, trying to place it in my memory. October 2019. We'd been married 36 years. We'd hosted that dinner party for the Historical Society board. I'd made shrimp and grits. Silas had laughed at something the president said. I thought he looked tired that week. I told him to go to the doctor. He'd said it was just stress. He'd said it was the quarterly review at work. The first word my eyes landed on wasn't cancer, it was pancreatic. And under that, in bold, terrifying font, adenocarcinoma. Stage 4. Metastatic. My hands started shaking so hard I had to press the pages against my thighs to keep them from fluttering to the floor. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh. I forced myself to read further. Prognosis, 6-12 months with aggressive chemotherapy. 3-4 months with palliative care only. And then the doctor's note scrawled in that hurried handwriting you see so often in medical files. Patient has explicitly refused all aggressive treatment. Patient wishes to pursue palliative options only. Patient states, I had matters to attend to. Matters to attend to? That's what he called it. While I was planning our 38th anniversary party, he was planning his exit. While I was researching contractors to fix the roof on the townhouse, he was researching how to strip the equity out of it. While I was sleeping beside him every night, listening to his breathing, he was a dead man walking. You have to understand the timeline here. He was diagnosed 2 years ago. The doctor gave him months. He chose not to fight it. He chose to use whatever time he had left to dismantle my life. I looked back at the bank statement in my other hand. The HELOC was maxed out on August 15th. That was less than 3 months ago. He should have been dead, but he wasn't. He was still here, still driving to Marietta, still paying for that boy's private school tuition with my inheritance, still buying Italian silk suits, still lying about Beverly from church. The sound of the shower cut off upstairs. The pipes groaned. I could picture him stepping onto the bath mat, toweling off, looking at himself in the mirror, knowing what was happening inside his body. Did he feel sick? Was he in pain? Was that why he started sleeping in the guest room 6 months ago? The headaches, the nausea, or was it just another way to distance himself from me before the end? I read the medical report again, looking for something else, some explanation, some note that would make this make sense. Primary tumor, head of pancreas. Metastases, liver, lungs. Pain management, ongoing. That's why he was taking those pills, the ones I found in his coat pocket last winter. He told me they were vitamins. He told me they were for his back. He told me they were nothing. Everything was nothing. Every question was met with a deflection. Every concern was met with a gentle smile and a pat on the hand. I realized then that I hadn't just been losing him to another woman. I hadn't just been losing him to another family. I'd been losing him to death itself, and he had used that dying time, those final precious months that we could have spent together, that we could have spent saying the things that need to be said between two people who loved each other for 40 years. He had used that time to build a financial fortress for her, a fortress made out of my life. The bathroom door opened upstairs. The floorboard creaked, the third one from the landing, the one that always squeaked when he put his weight on it wrong. I had 40 seconds, maybe a minute. I needed to hide this. I needed to put it back in the envelope. I needed to put the envelope back in my purse. I needed to sit here and look like a woman who was just enjoying her morning coffee. Not a woman whose entire reality had just been shattered for the second time in 20 minutes. But as I slid the pages back into the manila envelope, I couldn't stop the thought from echoing through my mind over and over again. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a dead man walking, spending his last breaths, making sure I had nothing. That floorboard, the third one from the top of the staircase, it's been squeaking since 1987. And I swear to you, in that moment, it sounded like a gunshot. Silas was coming down. I had exactly 20 seconds. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the manila envelope. I shoved the Winship Cancer records into the bottom of my purse, under a pack of gum, and my reading glasses. Then I grabbed the bank statement from First Citizens Bank, the one showing a $400,000 HELOC, and slid that in too. I threw my purse on the kitchen counter like nothing was wrong, calm, collected. The librarian who keeps her composure even when the water pipes burst. But my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard him on the stairs, slow, deliberate, one step at a time. The sound of his house shoes dragging across the hardwood, and then silence. I walked into the living room, and there he was, Silas, sitting in his leather armchair like a king on a withering throne. The morning light was hitting him just right, and that's when I saw it, his eyes. They weren't the warm brown I'd fallen in love with in the archives all those years ago. They were yellow, a sickly bile yellow that told me everything I needed to know about what was happening inside his body. He looked fragile, like a dry leaf that might crumble if you breathed on it too hard. And I'm not gonna lie, I felt it, pity. For half a second, I looked at this man who was literally rotting alive, and my heart broke. He adjusted his cardigan, shivering even though it was 74 degrees in the house. Cold L, he whispered. Always so cold these days. That's when the pity evaporated. Because I remembered. I remembered the forged will, the mortgage on my grandmother's house, the fake divorce papers, the peach-scented lies. I reached into my purse. My fingers found the medical records. I pulled them out. I didn't speak. I just walked over to his chair and dropped the stack of papers right onto his lap. They scattered. Some slid onto the floor. The date on the top page stared up at him, October 14th, 2 years ago. Winship Cancer Institute. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Stage 4, his face didn't change. Not shock. Not surprise. Just resignation. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. He picked up the first page, his hands trembling, and folded it neatly along the crease. You found the envelope, he said, quiet, calm, like we were discussing the weather. I looked at him and said, 2 years, Silas. 2 years you've been dying, and you spent every single day of it stealing from me. Why? Why the debt? Why the lies? Why make me the villain in your little story? He leaned his head back against the leather and closed those yellow eyes. When he opened them again, he didn't look like the man I married. He looked like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. You want the truth? He asked, and his voice cracked, just a little jagged edge of sound. I'm not leaving this earth without securing my legacy. Sonia is fine. She has you. She has her career. But Julian, he has nothing if I don't provide. I stared at him, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. Julian, I said. The name tasted like ash. Your son. He whispered. Elle, I have a son who needs a legacy. He looked right at me, through me, really, and said, you have your career. He has nothing. And in that moment, something inside me went cold, not numb. Cold. Calculated. The archive doors slammed shut on 38 years of marriage, and I realized, standing there in the morning light, that the man sitting in front of me wasn't my husband. He was just another case file. A thief who got caught. The end came quiet. You know how in these true crime documentaries they always have a dramatic montage? Rain lashing against the window, a sudden gasp for air, a final confession whispered into a recorder. It wasn't like that. It was administrative. It was a file closing. October 24th, 4012 a.m. The hospice nurse checked her watch. She wrote the time on a clipboard. Click, scratch, sigh. Just like that. Silas Osei-Mensah was officially a case number. I didn't hold his hand. I didn't smooth his hair. I sat in the corner of the guest room and watched him stop breathing. He looked smaller. Without the arrogance to inflate him, he was just a shell. The jaundice had turned his skin a waxy yellow. 2 weeks later. That's how long it took to put him in the ground. We are at Bonaventure Cemetery. You know the spot. Spanish moss draping down like gray veils, the humidity so thick you feel like you're swallowing soup. It was fitting, heavy, suffocating. The very air in Savannah wears you down, doesn't it? I'm standing there in my black dress. It's a vintage piece, 1950s crepe high collar. I bought it for my mother's funeral, never thinking I'd wear it for him. Sonia's next to me, holding my arm, her sunglasses hiding her eyes. She thinks I'm grieving. She thinks I'm crying inside for the man who raised her. She doesn't know yet that he sold her birthright for a boy in Marietta. And then I saw her, Maribel. She was standing under a live oak tree about 20 yards away in a simple black dress. She wasn't wearing the Williams-Sonoma apron this time. She was clutching a handkerchief, and next to her was the boy, Julian, the heir, the legacy. He looked like Silas, same jawline, same nose. It was like looking at a ghost from the past. I didn't approach her. I didn't scream. That's what Silas would have expected. He would have wanted the drama. Instead, I just looked at her, and she looked at me. The distance between us was filled with 38 years of lies, with fake deeds of divorce and forged signatures and mortgage papers signed in blood. But in that moment, I saw something familiar. I saw the same hollowed-out shock in her eyes, the realization that the man we loved was a fiction. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. We were both victims of the same con. We both had a silhouette. The preacher was saying something about ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I wasn't listening. I was watching a dragonfly hover over the coffin. Silas always hated bugs. He would have been swatting at it. But he couldn't swat anymore. The betrayal tastes like nothing. It's just a void. A zero-sum game where the house wins and the players leave broke. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh, even in death. They lowered him down. Thud. That's the sound of the end. Not a scream, not a confession, just dirt hitting wood. Maribel turned around and walked toward her car sedan, nothing flashy. Julian followed her, looking back at Sonia once. A look of confusion. He has no idea who his dad really was. It's over now. The archives are closed. The double life has collapsed into a single grave. I didn't cry at the funeral. I saved my tears for the meeting with the lawyers. The ink was dry, but the lie was fresh. That's what the forensic examiner said when he put Silas's fake divorce decree under the ultraviolet light. Silas was many things. Cheat, liar, bigamist, but he was not a master forger. The paperweight was all wrong. It was standard 20-pound copy paper from Office Depot, not the heavy bond a court clerk used in 2015. It took the jury all of 45 minutes to nullify that second marriage. Maribel Castellano wasn't a wife in the eyes of the law. She was just a victim of a very convincing con, just like me. I sat across from her in the hallway of the courthouse while the lawyers argued about the house. She looked so small, clutching that beige patent leather purse, wearing that same chemical peach scent that used to make the back of my throat burn. I didn't feel hate anymore. I just felt tired. She looked at me with hollow, red-rimmed eyes and whispered, "I thought he loved me." That was the tragedy, wasn't it? He probably did in his own selfish way. But love doesn't pay the mortgage, and it certainly doesn't forgive a forged document. So I won. That's what my lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, told me. But you know that feeling when you win a battle but lose the war? That's what standing in my foyer felt like last Tuesday. The house is mine, yes. The title is clear of Maribel's claim. But Silas had leveraged this place to the hilt. That HELOC, the one he took out on August 15th, the same day he rewrote his will. The bank doesn't care about bigamy or heartbreak. The bank cares about the $400,000 he stole against the equity of my grandmother's home. To pay it off, to clear the title so I can actually sell it, I have to liquidate everything. The retirement fund I scrimped for, the savings account, the life insurance policy, all of it. I'm selling the townhouse. It went on the market yesterday. The for sale sign is a bright, glaring slash of yellow against the gray brick. It hurts to look at it, but not as much as living inside the lie does. I've spent the last 3 days packing. Sonia came over to help, bless her heart, but she just kept crying every time she found an old photo. So I sent her home. I told her I needed to do the archival work myself. And I did. I went through the study. I found the fireproof safe he was so obsessed with last summer. It was empty, of course. He'd shredded everything that mattered. But I found a receipt from a gas station in Macon dated October 3rd, 2 years ago. He bought a bag of salted peanuts and a bottle of water. I remember that day. He called me and said he was stuck in traffic on I-16. He wasn't. He was sitting at a pilot station, probably on his way to see her, eating peanuts while I worried about him making it home for dinner. I threw the receipt in the trash, then I took it out and burned it in the sink. Yesterday evening, Sonia came back. She brought a pizza from Vinny's on Broughton Street, the pepperoni kind with the extra crispy crust. We sat on the floor of this empty living room, right where Silas used to sit in his leather chair. The grease stained the cardboard box we were using as a table, and for a second I panicked about the deposit. Then I remembered I own this place. Well, technically the bank does. Sonia looked at me with those serious eyes of hers and said, "Mom, we can fight the debt. We can prove fraud." She's a digital investigator. She thinks everything has a digital trail, but a paper trail for cash withdrawals? That's harder. I told her, "Baby, let the lawyers handle the math. We need to handle the moving." It was the first time I felt like the mother and she was the child in years. The boxes are stacked in the hallway now, looming over me like silent monoliths. Labeled kitchen, books, Silas. That last box is the heaviest. It's not full of stuff, really. Just his old watch, those Italian leather loafers and a tie. I'm leaving the Italian wool suit he bought for his wedding to Maribel. I'm donating it to Goodwill. Let some other man wear it. The sound of the tape gun. It echoes. It's the only sound in this house now besides the hum of the refrigerator I sold to the neighbor for 50 bucks. I packed up the china. The blue willow pattern my grandmother bought in 1954. Silas hated it. He said it looked claustrophobic. I packed every single plate wrapped in newspaper from the Savannah Morning News. The silence in here is deafening, the ticking clock in the hallway. It used to drive me crazy. Silas would always say, "Eloise, that clock is just measuring time, don't let it rule you." But he was wrong. That clock was measuring the time he was stealing from me. Tick tock. 4 hours to Marietta. Tick tock. 2 years of cancer he hid from me. Tick tock. 15 years of a second life. Now the clock is just measuring the time until I walk out that door for the last time. The realtor said the house has good bones. That's Southern realtor speak for, it's old and drafty, but we can sell it if we bake cookies before the open house. I don't know if I'll buy another place. Maybe I'll get a condo. Something small. Something without a guest room for secrets. Or maybe I'll just travel. There's a whole world out there that isn't Savannah. I'm standing by the front door. The lock is clicking shut for the last time. The sun is going down over the Gordonston squares. The Spanish moss is hanging low, gray, and heavy in the twilight. It looks like the curtains in an old theater. The show is over. The actors have left the stage. The set is being dismantled. I am Eloise Osei-Mensah. I am 62 years old. I have to start over, but at least I know the truth now. You don't lose things in an archive. You just misfile them. And I am finally reorganizing my own life. I'm not a wife. I'm a survivor.